But the silver lining in this is that I think like one ecosystem's loss is another's gain. I think when I was at Snapdeal, we used to kind of celebrate the story that Kunal left for India because he couldn't get his visa renewed or whatever at Microsoft, right? And one could argue that like all of the building and investing that him and Rohit and others have done would not have happened if he didn't lose his visa and come back to India, right? So we say within GC that like look at all these successful Indian American CEOs, right? If you look at the Satya and Sundar and Shantanu and so many other successful, there's now such a large list. The next generation of these leaders who are graduating from an IIT right now are not moving to the US, right? So I think this transformation is actually happening quite silently, where I think previously 90%, 95% of the class would move to the US. And now already there is a trend where 95% is not moving. They're either joining a startup or doing a startup.
Today we had Anand Chandrasekaran on the pod. Anand is a partner at Journal Catalyst. In his role, he is focused on early stage investing and leading the India-US practice across consumer, climate, agri, healthcare, software, and crypto fintech. Anand is one of the very few people out there who has been an operator and investor in both the US and India. He's also considered as one of the top angel investors in India. In this pod, we covered areas like his journey of growing up in India to what led him to move to the US, his operating experiences in India, learnings from angel investing in India, what made him join Journal Catalyst, and his thesis and Journal Catalyst thesis for India, and much more. I learned a lot from this conversation, and I'm hoping that you would too. All right, let's roll it. I am super excited to have Anand Chandrasekaran on 1947 Rise podcast. Anand, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Shiva. It's good to be here.
We'll dive right into it, Anand. Typically, we are really a product of our experiences growing up. Why don't you walk us through your journey of growing up in India and then moving to the US? What made you move to the US?
Yeah. So I think there are probably two themes, right? So one is I grew up in a small town called Coimbatore in India, and growing up, obviously didn't have internet access for a large, part of my childhood, which is like really hard to believe now. The few of us who got early access to the internet, obviously that changed our lives and exposed us to so much that was going on outside our borders and outside sort of our communities. And so that was sort of my experience as well, not that different from what so many of us have been through. And that actually became a theme for a lot of what I was seeking professionally as well, which is this concept of how the internet can democratize something for everybody, and when you can bring access to everyone, really good things happen. Now, that by itself is not a sufficient principle. For example, Facebook connected everyone, and that didn't necessarily lead to good on all fronts. But in general, democratizing access in different spaces leads to just diversity of voices and people finding opportunity and so on. So that's actually been like a big theme. If you sort of look at Messenger, where everybody has access to free premium messaging, or Snapdeal, where everyone has access to the same products you would get at a mall in like Delhi or Bangalore or one of the big cities, even if you were living in tier 4 town in India. Or Airtel, where there's mobile data for 300 million people. You can sort of see the theme, right, of democratization, and that's been a central theme where I feel like that's one of the biggest powers that technology has. But in the later part of my career, what I've also realized is it's important for builders to also build responsibly, because sometimes you as they say, you have to be careful what you wish for, because you might get it and then you might not be pleased with what the impact is of that democratization in a space. And then the other theme that has been sort of overarching is sort of the search for meritocracies and places where the best ideas thrive. And so growing up, I was just lucky to read this book called Only the Paranoid Survive, which came in, the early 90s. And uh, kind of read about this place called Silicon Valley, right? And growing up in a small town, it took me a while to even know that that's not an actual city. Like it's sort of a name for a broad swath of area. But I was like, I'm super intrigued by Silicon Valley. I think like that's a place where the best ideas thrive. And obviously, going to Stanford was a great way to enter Silicon Valley. And the a funny story there is that the year that I landed in Silicon Valley, and the next year we started a company called Aeroprise and built a mobile enterprise software business. It was also, the worst year in 25 years to start a business in America. But as recent graduates, like we didn't know what we didn't know, I guess. And that naivete, I think, is one of the reasons a lot of people start businesses, right? If they knew enough, they probably wouldn't start businesses. And then the last thing I'll say on that is, I think that our business was we survived the dot com boom and the bust, and we were acquired by BMC Software for like around about $50 million or something. But what I realized was that when we were struggling. Was when we really wanted the support of investors and mentors and advisors, not when things were going really well. And those were also the hardest times to attract supporters, right? And so it's really shaped my thinking on, are you early stage capital or are you a believer in the business, right? Because in early stage businesses, founders need believers, not early stage capital.
Love it, Anand. I had only read where a book can change someone's life. It did for you. And Anand, you decided to move back and you worked in, a couple of great companies in India, Airtel and Snapdeal. Maybe can you walk us through your framework of moving back and your experience and biggest learnings while working at these companies in India?
Yeah, I think the best way I would frame it is there's innovation which is 0 to 1 innovation, and then there's like 1 to n innovation. And what I had seen in the valley between like 2000 and 2010 or so was really a lot of 0 to 1 innovation, right? There was the Web 1.0, then there was Web 2.0, etc. And what I saw happening sort of in the early 2010s is what you now call 1 to n innovation, which is the same models were getting replicated in China and India and so on. And China was obviously further along than India. And I was able to see that pattern while I was at Yahoo, where some of our products were just organically growing in India and China. And my sort of simple heuristic was, I don't have really any cultural advantage in China, not knowing the language and the local culture and everything that's so important to succeed and build great products and businesses there. But I had a cultural, advantage in India, having grown up in India and understanding Indian culture a little bit more. And this was obviously pre-geo, right? So it was much harder to get users for a new product. And as I now look back, I sort of think of it as the cowboy phase, where you would do whatever it took to get users and distribution for your product, because there was no natural distribution push for your product, right? Um, and I think the other thing I would say is, whether intentionally or serendipitously, I ended up working in cultures that were like very authentically Indian cultures. And so got to see, what motivates teams of Indian engineers and so on, which was a lot of unlearning, right? If you grew up in Silicon Valley, there's a bunch of principles that are ingrained in your mind, and there's a bunch of technology learnings ingrained in your mind, like you build for iOS primarily in mobile, and you show up in India and iOS is like less than 5% of your users. And so you have to like unlearn pretty much everything you knew about building a mobile product and build for Android, and that's 95% of your users. And so really got to unlearn and learn both on the product side but also on the culture side. So to give you an example, one of the things that I would see is people would collaborate, but only if it got them ahead, right? So whereas in the US, like, you're naturally ingrained to believe that collaborative teams build better products and so on, right? So one of the things that we did is we associated people getting promoted with people collaborating, right? And instantly people started collaborating. And so what I discovered is that people are actually like quite fungible on these kinds of work principles as to what will get them ahead, right? Versus like basic principles that they believe in no matter what. And so you can actually incentivize people to do the right thing quite easily. And then there's also this concept of power distance, where the ability for someone to like say something directly to the CEO, it's obviously very different now, but going back 8 to 10 years, at Google, an engineer would speak up to the CEO as if they were peers, whereas in India, the junior engineer would only speak when spoken to from the CEO, right? So there was sort of a power distance between the hierarchy and the people in the bottom. And what was exciting and challenging for me at the same time was to try to bring in the best principles from Silicon Valley that would work to build a great product, but also to take authentically relevant principles in India that were already working, as opposed to sort of having this mindset of, because I come from Silicon Valley, I know what's right. And actually, for me to learn from India, right? And now, of course, we know some of those things that are great about building in India and teams in India. But for me, actually, that unlearning process was two-way, right? I was like, what can I learn from teams here that actually makes sense for a fuller set of tools in my arsenal while I was building products.
Very fascinating insights here, Anand. We're gonna double click on this in a bit, but before that, your next phase was you started angel investing. What drove you into angel investing? Also, do you remember your first angel investment? And fast forward to today, you're one of the best angels in India after doing 80 investments with portfolio companies like No Broker, DealShare, One Car, to name a few. Would love to have you dive into it.
Yeah, so again, it starts with lessons that I learned in Silicon Valley while I was there before I moved to India, and people who would reply to my unsolicited emails in Silicon Valley to ask for help, right? And I sort of they didn't really have to reply to me at all, but they would within the hour, and they would meet up for coffee, and they would extend ways of helping. And the best example of this was the late Professor Rajiv Motwani at Stanford, who's a professor of computer science, who was one of the earliest angels in Google and many other companies. And he was just like so generous with his time for someone like me who was figuring so many things out for the first time, an engineer trying to build a business. And his generosity of helping founders without trying to think of what was in it for him transactionally, I think really stuck with me. And when I saw the ecosystem getting built in India, it really came back to me that one of the reasons Silicon Valley was so magical was because of glue, people who were the glue of Silicon Valley, like the Rajiv Motwanis of the world. And there are many, right? This was just the one person that had kind of impacted my career and my life at that point. Um, and I was like, what is a way that I could play that role for the next generation of people, particularly people who are struggling with the notion that they needed to build excellent products, right? So I really wanted to stand for, an excellent company cannot happen if you don't build an excellent product, right? So that sort of became a credo for me, and people who were naturally aligned with that mission sort of became the people who self-selected and reached out to me and so on. And I was actually showing this also in the products that I was building as part of my operating roles, right? So my team and I launched Wink Music in India, My Airtel, which is a billing and payments product, and then Airtel Money as a full reboot. And then at Snapdeal, I built, the Snapdeal app and the FreeCharge app, which we acquired and made that a payments platform. So it was quite a set of verticals and experiences. And people were seeing that, right? They were themselves users of those products. And they're like, I remember what it was like before, and I remember what it's like now. And I know a better product can lead to a better business. And so actually one of the first founders that reached out to me, you called them out, was Amit from No Broker. And basically, they were so self-aware, and they knew what kind of business they wanted to build. And he basically said, look, our round is fully stitched up, but we want to get someone on our cap table who, believes that excellent product really matters to build a great business. And I remember visiting them and I was already like not that familiar with Bangalore because I was living in Delhi at that time. But I really struggled to find their office, and I messaged Amit and said, "Why is there no signage outside your office? I thought you guys were like a legitimate funded company. Couldn't you put some signage outside your office?" And he was like, "Well, why don't you come to the office and I'll tell you why there's no signage." And basically, the long story short was the brokers who were charging an arm and a leg to these consumers without perhaps not adding a lot of value. They had like come up and beaten up all the employees and broken the glass in their office and destroyed the computers and all that because they really thought that by doing that the internet service would disappear. And they didn't really understand how the internet was disrupting their business. And I was like, how cool is this business that is having such an impact on the ecosystem and elevating the consumer experience in a fragmented space that the people who are getting disrupted literally wanted to destroy them. And that's, to me, if I needed a sign that the business was heading towards product market fit, like that was the sign. And that was one of my earliest angel investments.
Got it. And Anand, what's something that you know now you wish you knew it earlier in terms of angel investing?
Yeah, I will say, and this is probably a very timely statement to make, given what's going on in the Indian ecosystem today, is that I do think that at the earliest stage, you're really betting on the founder, right? And I know that's cliched, and everyone says that, but I think like actually developing that deep conviction in like the why behind that founder, and why this problem is so important for this founder that they would dedicate the rest of their life towards building an important business that stands the test of time, right? And I'll give you a real story with founders that you may actually know. So about 2 or 3 years ago, I got to meet Dhruv and Tarun from Orange Health, right? And the story may not have ever been told, so maybe it's like the first time someone's saying this. But I had actually committed to be an angel in their earliest round. And they called me a week or two later and they said, look, our round is falling apart. We lost our lead investor, and we're very confident we're going to find a replacement. There's enough interest. But the reason we're calling you is because we didn't know what percent of your decision was based on the fact that we had a round stitched up and a lead investor and so on. So we don't want you to leave, but if you left, we would understand, right? But we thought we should give you all of this relevant context so that you don't find that out from somebody else or whatnot, right? And the entire call, in my mind, I'm thinking the only doubt that I had was, look, these people are going to draw blood from people's bodies, right? This is like really deep trust, right? People are trusting the results of these tests to the integrity of a service like Orange Health that they were building. And what better conviction can you develop than to know that these guys' integrity is like unquestionable, right? Even on the worst day of their, still pretty early journey, they decided to err on the side of being like extremely high integrity. And now it's like 2 or 3 years later, and they're still, demonstrating their willingness and desire to build a business that's on, real principles. And then they've taken, their business differentiators and really tied it with values that matter for the patients, right? And so their principle is that if you really want to show empathy, show speed, right? Because when people are suffering, just empty words, don't really matter, right? The way you show empathy is through speed. And so their entire motto is to like do the test within a guaranteed turnaround time, whether it's the response to a message, whether it's the phlebotomist showing up, or you getting the results, right? So to me, it's an important example of the next generation of health tech getting built. But the founders are actually demonstrating a certain value set that you can use to develop a lot of conviction in the founders. And so we're very happy investors as General Catalyst in Orange Health as well. And to me, it's like a really interesting antidote to the growth at all costs kind of mindset that some founders are demonstrating today,
Yeah.
versus really aligning your values with what's good for your stakeholders.
Yeah. And let me tell you this, Anand. I think Dhruv was Definitely one of the most thoughtful guests that I've had on the 1947 Rise
I'm not
podcast.
surprised at all. The
Yeah.
Tarun and Dhruv were amazing.
And with this, Anand, uh, would love to know about your transition to full-time venture capitalist. How did GC happen?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's um, for me, it was like two or three things, right? One was the folks that I'm like lucky to work with today as my like colleagues and partners, and the team here. I really felt like it's one thing to invest a small amount of money as an angel. It's one thing to be an institutional investor that helps and guides and partners with a company for decades to come. And there was just innumerable examples of how GC had done that and compounded knowledge. And for me, it was just, I sort of have a personal philosophy of just getting 1% better every day. And so it was just like such a, um, uh, I was just so grateful to have this entire partnership. And the way we operate is also to show up as a single partnership for all our Indian companies, just like we do in Europe or LATAM or the US or anywhere else. And so we can actually collectively bring this knowledge and compounding and war stories and knowing how the movie plays out in other parts of the world to every founder in India. And last year we actually had over a dozen of our seed stage portfolio companies come to Palo Alto and walk away with like GC as a whole is available to you, not just a couple of people who are focused on India, right? Which is sort of a way we are very complementary to all the other investors that are adding value in so many other ways, right? So this is a very complementary way of adding value. The other thing that I think drew me was, the month that I joined GC, our CEO, Hemant Taneja, wrote a book which sort of dispels the myth that you either have to do good or you have to do well. And it's this principle, a set of principles that you can actually build an enduring business that does really well for its shareholders, and you can do good for the various stakeholders, right? We talked about the Orange Health example. There's innumerable examples like that, whether you take Iki or Pharmart or so many other examples. And for me, that was actually a really interesting code as I was considering transitioning, where over a long period of time, you're not doing one or the other. Folks either do ESG investing, which doesn't lead to a lot of great returns, right? We see the stories of ESG minded decisions that led to like economic collapse in Sri Lanka and so on. Or you do growth at all costs, returns at all costs, and you end up with societal consequences that are very undesirable. And so this was really like a unique approach to investing, which I don't even know if it's truly like venture, right? And also we have a full stack approach, which is everything from on one extreme, we actually create a business from scratch, like one of the partners at GC or in partnership with the founder creates a company from scratch. So we're present at that early stage of creation, and we call it the creation fund. And then on the other end, like we are able to invest all the way to IPO and beyond. And it's everything in between. And there's like a lot of sector coverage. So we can actually like partner with a company that we talked about this, founders that are going to build these like very long term, enduring, sustainable companies. We can actually be a partner over the entire life cycle, and different partners are relevant for different stages of the life cycle. And so, it's really like a unique approach to investing. Which, by the way, there are multiple approaches, and we believe this one is extremely differentiated and aligned with founders.
Got it. And Anand, what's the thesis that you and GC have for India? And what stages do you come in? What sectors do you invest in? What kind of check sizes you said you can go from, pre-idea or idea to IPO?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the sectors that we have practices in are really consumer, software and AI, and the transformations that we're seeing in fintech and the coming together of fintech and crypto, and then the transformation in health tech, which we call health assurance. as opposed to just treating the sick. So those are the four practices that we have globally that we're bringing to India as well. And our India portfolio is now about 23 companies, and it reflects a lot of these sectors globally. And also stage wise, we do everything from the first pre-seed check in India, or even creating the company together, all the way to late stage investing. And in terms of thesis, it's two kinds of companies that we've done up to now. One is where we really deeply believe in a thesis. We think important companies will be built in that thesis, and we think increasingly the most important companies will be created in India, like any other part of the world, right? So this is there's a little nuance to, like, we don't invest in the best Indian companies. We're trying to invest in the best companies, period. And increasingly, a larger percentage of them are being created out of India, or with a very meaningful India angle. Um, and then the other thesis, which is really close to my heart, and you talked about companies like Dealshare and others, is what we call the Bharat thesis, which is different from Indian consumers. And the distinction is that India is really like the top 30 to 50 million consumers, and they really sort of operate like Western audiences, right? Like they watch Netflix, they eat burgers, they wear sneakers, similar to the US. And then Bharat is like the next 250 to 500 million Indians, where when they come online, um, one really point of distinction is that they're not looking for the fourth sneaker app, right? Like the top 30 million people do. They're looking for things like, hey, I used to, have a business in agri tech. Can I use technology to automate a certain part of my farm so that I can get a better yield, or so I can, make residue-free, higher nutrition veggies, or is basically solving the same problem but through technology interventions, right? A second example of this is young people coming online. Let's say, I'm 21 years old. I come online in a tier 3, tier 4 town in India, and my dad was an insurance agent, right? Now, I know that I need to like make a living. I need to get some gainful employment, but I also don't want to do the job of yesteryear. And so I'm looking to combine like internet first, digital first jobs with sort of the need for employment, right? Because of where I come from and the social strata. So we're investors in a company called OneCode, which sort of does this. It allows those agents to use their local trust and local relationships to actually distribute fintech products, and in the process bring financial inclusion to the next sort of 50 to 100 million people. And then the last thing I would say is that we talked about this theme of democratization at the start of the conversation. As more people come online, you're seeing a lot of people who were previously marginalized now get a voice, right? So two examples of this, like we're investors in a company called GetsUp, which is really catering to a lot of women users coming online, and they're going to get their nutrition advice not from their grandmothers and their next door neighbors and from their small towns, but from get real scientific information from dietitians and nutritionists and so on, and really get the best high quality nutritional supplements and so on for their family, right? So this is an example of a previously marginalized user now being empowered and wanting to discover great services through the internet, right? Similarly, we're investors in Stan, which is a very unlikely example of a Bharat company, which is these kids are coming online and realizing that just like kids anywhere else in the world, they can be great gamers, and it's both entertaining as well as building community. And the ones who've gotten really good at gaming can now actually make a living by connecting with their fans. And actually, both the gamers and the fans are from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns. And this is actually really interesting company. They're at the product market fit stage. So actually, the Bharat thesis is sort of the secular thesis across stages and sectors as the next 250 to 500 million Indians come online.
Love the thesis, Anand. And, there's so many factors that are in favor of India going forward. But what's something, or I would say a change, Anand, that you would like to see in the Indian ecosystem?
The thing I would say is uh, a lot of the founders and builders in India, for all good reasons, have to be generalists up to now, right? You really don't have a lot of people with a lot of specialized skills given the maturity of the ecosystem, like where we are in the maturation. But I think the next generation will see like a lot of craftsmanship develop in various skill sets. I use a story that like if you are in Silicon Valley and you want to know someone who's the expert in like endpoint and perimeter security, right? You can email somebody, they'll email back within the hour, and they literally have dedicated their entire career to being the expert in that one area, right? And the way the ecosystem works is that there is a monetization model for someone who's so good at the craft on one thing, right? Or if you look at like Apple's approach to perfection and building great products, those designers are like spending a year like going from 95% grade to like 99% grade, right? And so I think like that's both a prediction that I think will happen and both a wish that it happens sooner. Is that people just start to pursue their passion for something and get really good at the craft, and the business model sort of starts to work out for more people, whether it's as a creator or that their expertise is valuable and so on. Um, and and that's it's a pretty standard evolution process where everybody starts as generalists, and then you find a few areas where specialization and craft development happens. And it's happened in like some of the when I showed up in Delhi in 2014, and I said I'm the chief product officer of Airtel. People are like, I don't know what that means. Like, what do you do for a job, right? So people didn't know what a product manager was in like now 8 years ago, right? And these are very smart people. And now I think we've evolved to a place where people understand those functions and what they do, and they understand they're important, right? Designers and product managers and infrastructure engineers and so on. And so I think it's an evolution, but that's something I'm really excited about, because we'll see some world class people who are really good, not just in India but in the world, emerge out of India as well.
Yeah, I'm there with you on that. And then Anand, sometimes outside factors can really help, let's say, a company or even a nation to scale. So what we are seeing right now, there's a lot of layoffs in the US. I think I saw the stats, 200,000, and out of those 200,000, 50,000 are Indians. And typically you get, let's say, 60 days to find a job. Otherwise, you would have to move back to your country. What's your take on that? Like, would this be great for the country? Meaning, people would have to. There were some people who were thinking about moving back to India, and now this thing is just going to accelerate the move. What's your take on that? Would love to hear
Yeah,
from you.
yeah. I think two thoughts, right? One is that look, Indians have emerged really as the one of the most sort of high social strata and high capital per capita GDP in terms of types of people in America, immigrant types, if you will. And so just because of the percentage representation in those companies, just by law of large numbers, when there are lots of layoffs, the largest represented class will be affected unfairly. So I don't think it's anything other than Indians benefited the most when there was a lot of hiring, and because the representation is so high, Indians are being unfairly affected. So it's actually really sad to see that happen, and people having been there as a as an immigrant who's like going through the visa process, I actually feel a lot of empathy for people who are going through the stress, and if they have families and kids in school and all of that. In particular, if people have dedicated a decade of their career to a company, to see these like rapid changes in the company's fortunes, and like literally overnight you're shut out of your company's account, that's a new thing. There used to be like a lot more gradual transition. So this is a new thing, and it further adds to the stress that these families and individuals are going through. But the silver lining in this is that I think like one ecosystem's loss is another's gain. I think when I was at Snapdeal, we used to kind of celebrate the story that Kunal left for India because he couldn't get his visa renewed or whatever at Microsoft, right? And one could argue that like all of the building and investing that him and Rohit and others have done would not have happened if he didn't lose his visa and come back to India, right?
Mhm.
So we say within GC that like look at all these successful Indian American CEOs, right? If you look at the Satya and Sundar and Shantanu and so many other successful, there's now such a large list.
Yep.
The next generation of these leaders who are graduating from an IIT right now are not moving to the US, right? So I think this transformation is actually happening quite silently, where I think previously 90%, 95% of the class would move to the US. And now already there is a trend where 95% is not moving. They're either joining a startup or doing a startup. And actually, what will happen is capital will actually chase them to where they are, because people understand, what economic value these very successful minds can create. So I think like it's actually kind of an interesting geopolitical change that we're seeing. And increasingly, what we believe is that India and the US will work together a lot more closely. And we're already seeing examples of that. But there's going to be a lot more, areas where the two countries and the two regions, both at the economic level and other levels, are going to collaborate, way more closely.
Got it. And with this, Anand, we'll move to our third section. And as said earlier, my co pilot Alfonso is going to drive it. So
Yeah.
his first question is, Anand, if money and attention are not needed anymore, what would you work on?
Um, I would say two things, right? One is a serious answer, and one is somewhat funny. Is I actually really like education and educating, and I honestly think it's the biggest opportunity for transformation. For people to just get to the next level of opportunity and to discover their own potential. So I'd probably find some way of like teaching and learning. Um, and the more sort of funny answer is like I love actually just observing things like watchmaking. So just again going back to craftsmanship. So I probably like find some way to associate with like craftsmen of some sort.
I love it. And Anand, what's your relationship with money?
Um, I think that having grown up in a family and an upbringing and a strata society where we were very clearly lower middle class, graduating to the next level, I think that there's sort of this I think Mahatma Gandhi quote that poverty is actually one of the best injustices, one of the worst injustices, right? So I think that. I think folks having the ability to like just pursue their passion without having to compromise purely based on economic needs, I think is something I'm personally very passionate about. But I think beyond that, as we all know, to me the a happy day in this role is actually when we all joke about it at General Catalyst, like after a meeting, which is you meet a founder who has such a clear-eyed vision for what they want the world to be, and they're already, as we say, living in the future. And it's almost like they have one foot in the present, but they already know what that other foot looks like in the future. And they're like almost, very reluctantly dragging everybody into the future because they have such a clear-eyed view of what that future looks like. And that's really like what a really joyful day is for most of us, where we have seen a glimpse of the future because somebody was generous enough to show us that glimpse. And then you can't like unsee it, right? Like the next morning you wake up and you really want to be a part of that journey. And so for me, I think obviously we have our investors, which are very long term aligned with folks like General Catalyst and a lot of investors. So we work really hard. We have discipline around wanting to return capital because we're mostly grateful for that opportunity that they've given us. And particularly when we say we're going to go invest in a new geography, obviously with additional risk, right? Like it's a new geography, there's new risk. You want to be a steward of all of these stakeholders. But I think to me, it's actually the opportunity to actually partner with these people who have seen the future. And then you just have a seat on that rocket ship, right? Like you're not really the reason why the company is really successful, but you're just lucky to be part of that journey.
Beautifully said, Anand. And what do your friends know you for? Who are you outside of work?
I think that I try to not take myself too seriously. So I'm usually like kind of with like family and friends. I'm usually the one like goofing around and pulling people's legs and pranks and stuff like that.
Got it. Love it. With this, Anand, thank you so much. I had a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and thanks to Alfonso as well.
it. He's happy too.